"You're just the IT guy, you don't matter," the CEO laughed as he cut my benefits. He didn't know I own the patent for the software the entire company runs on. I revoked the license for breach of contract. The stock dropped 80% overnight. I spent 7 years building something beautiful. 7 years writing code in my apartment after my day job, surviving on energy drinks and takeout containers that piled up around my desk like a fortress of ambition. The software I created wasn't flashy, but it solved a problem that nobody else had figured out: real-time inventory management synchronized across multiple supply chains with predictive analytics built into every function. I called it Stream Sync, and by the time I finished the final version, I knew I had something special. My background wasn't impressive by Silicon Valley standards. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where my father worked at a manufacturing plant for 30 years before automation took his job. He taught me that hard work meant something, that if you put in the hours and did things right, you'd be rewarded. I carried that belief with me through community college, through my computer science degree at a state university, through every rejection letter from companies that wanted Ivy League graduates instead of someone like me. Stream Sync started as my senior project. My professor told me the concept had potential but seemed too ambitious for one person to execute properly. I proved him wrong by working 16-hour days for 2 years, teaching myself advanced programming languages, studying patent law in my spare time, and eventually creating something that worked better than anything currently on the market. The patent approval came through on my 27th birthday. I remember staring at the official documentation, understanding that I now owned something valuable, something that could change my life. Getting a company to actually use my software turned out to be harder than building it. I sent proposals to dozens of firms. Most never responded. A few sent polite rejections. Then I met Preston Hayes at a tech conference in Austin. He ran a mid-sized logistics company called Titan Supply Solutions, and he actually listened when I explained what Stream Sync could do. We sat in a hotel bar for 3 hours while I walked him through every feature, every advantage, every way it could revolutionize his operations. Preston made me an offer. He wanted to license Stream Sync exclusively for Titan Supply Solutions. In exchange, I'd come work for them as their IT director, receive a decent salary, keep ownership of my patent, and get a small percentage of any efficiency gains the software generated. The contract clearly stated that my license could be revoked if Titan breached any terms of our agreement, including maintaining my position and compensation as outlined. My lawyer reviewed everything twice. I signed. The first 3 years were incredible. Stream Sync transformed Titan's operations completely. Shipping errors dropped by 72%. Inventory costs decreased by millions. Client satisfaction scores reached levels the company had never seen. Preston praised my work constantly, gave me bonuses, and invited me to executive meetings where I actually felt valued. The company's stock price climbed steadily. Everything I'd worked for seemed to be paying off exactly as I'd hoped. Then Titan went public, and Preston retired 6 months later. The board brought in a new CEO named Gerald Vaughn, a corporate restructuring specialist with a reputation for cutting costs and maximizing short-term profits. I met him once during his first week. He walked through the IT department with his assistant, barely glancing at any of us, asking questions about headcount and operational expenses. He didn't ask what we actually did. The changes started immediately. Gerald cut the holiday bonuses that Preston had made traditional. He eliminated the profit-sharing program. He reduced our healthcare coverage and increased our contribution costs. Every month brought new cuts, new policies designed to squeeze more productivity from fewer resources. Morale collapsed. 3 of my best team members quit within the first year of Gerald's tenure. I couldn't blame them. The first to leave was Kevin, my senior systems analyst who'd been with me since year 1. He'd helped me integrate Stream Sync across every department, spent countless nights troubleshooting issues, and knew the software almost as well as I did. His resignation letter was brief but pointed. He'd accepted a position elsewhere that actually valued his expertise. 2 weeks later, he was gone, and I was left training his replacement while handling my regular responsibilities. Sarah followed 3 months after Kevin. She'd managed our database architecture and had an intuitive understanding of how different systems interconnected. Her exit interview with HR mentioned the increased workload, decreased benefits, and feeling like management viewed the IT department as an expense to minimize rather than an asset to invest in. The HR representative took notes and did nothing. Then Marcus left, our network security specialist who'd implemented protocols that kept Titan systems protected from increasingly sophisticated threats. He didn't even give 2 weeks' notice, just submitted his resignation effective immediately after Gerald denied his request for additional security tools, calling them unnecessary expenditures for theoretical problems. Marcus found work at a competitor within days. I tried replacing them, but the budget Gerald approved made it impossible to hire anyone with comparable skills. We got entry-level candidates who needed extensive training, which fell on me and my remaining team members. Our workload increased while our capacity decreased. Systems that used to run smoothly started having issues because we lacked the personnel to maintain them properly. Gerald seemed completely unconcerned. During a quarterly review meeting, when I presented data showing how understaffing was creating operational risks, he interrupted me before I finished the second slide. "You're catastrophizing," he said dismissively. "Every department thinks they need more resources. Learning to do more with less is what separates good managers from mediocre ones. Figure it out." The other executives around the table avoided eye contact with me. They'd all experienced similar dismissals. Gerald ran meetings like a king addressing subjects rather than a leader collaborating with colleagues. Questions were treated as challenges to his authority. Suggestions were ignored unless they involved cutting costs. The company culture that Preston had carefully built over decades was disintegrating. I watched Titan's priorities shift month by month. Customer service response times increased because Gerald cut support staff. Product quality declined because he eliminated quality control positions. The warehouse operations started experiencing errors again, minor at first, but growing, because Gerald refused to invest in the equipment upgrades my team had recommended. StreamSync could only do so much when the hardware running it was outdated and failing. What frustrated me most was watching the quarterly earnings reports. Titan was making record profits. The efficiency gains from my software had increased revenue substantially, and Gerald's cost-cutting had eliminated expenses across every department. Shareholders were thrilled. The stock price climbed steadily. Wall Street analysts praised Gerald's leadership. But inside the company, everything was falling apart. I started documenting incidents systematically. Every time a system failure occurred due to understaffing, I recorded it. Every employee complained about working conditions went into a file. Every metric showing declining performance despite increasing profits got saved. I wasn't sure what I'd do with this information, but some instinct told me I'd need evidence eventually. The breaking point almost came 6 months before my meeting with Gerald. The company was preparing for its biggest client presentation of the year, a potential contract worth $40 million with a national retail chain. The presentation depended on demonstrating StreamSync's capabilities through a live system demonstration. 2 days before the meeting, our primary server cluster started experiencing critical failures. The problem was predictable. We'd been warning about hardware limitations for months. The servers were operating beyond their design capacity, and we lacked the redundancy protocols that proper staffing and equipment would have provided. I spent 36 hours straight working to stabilize the system, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and determination. My remaining team members did the same. We got everything operational just 4 hours before the presentation. The demonstration was flawless. The retail executives were impressed. Titan secured the contract. Gerald sent a company-wide email taking credit for the success, mentioning the sales team's excellent preparation and his own strategic vision. The IT department received no acknowledgement. When I sent him a private message explaining how close we'd come to complete disaster and reiterating our need for resources, he responded with a single line, "But you didn't fail. That's your job." I should have quit then. Several colleagues told me I was crazy for staying. But leaving felt like admitting defeat, like letting Gerald win. More than that, I felt responsible for the people who depended on Titan remaining functional. My software ran everything. If I left and systems collapsed because nobody else understood StreamSync's complexities, thousands of workers would suffer. That responsibility kept me trapped. Gerald's management philosophy became clearer over time. He didn't care about long-term sustainability or employee welfare. His focus was entirely on maximizing quarterly earnings to boost the stock price. I learned from conversations with people in finance that his compensation package was heavily weighted toward stock options. Every dollar he cut from operations increased profits, which increased the stock price, which made him personally wealthier. He was literally profiting from making our lives miserable. The healthcare changes hit me particularly hard. The new plan Gerald implemented had a deductible 3 times higher than our previous coverage. When I needed a minor surgical procedure for a recurring issue, I ended up paying thousands out of pocket, money I could afford, but the principal burned. I was generating millions in value for Titan, and they couldn't provide decent health coverage? Around this time, I started reviewing my original contract more carefully. I'd signed it 7 years ago when everything was optimistic and hopeful. Reading through it now, with years of experience and growing resentment, I noticed clauses I'd barely paid attention to initially. The licensing terms were ironclad. The performance requirements were specific. And the breach provisions gave me rights I hadn't fully appreciated. One section particularly caught my attention. In the event of material breach of employment terms by Titan Supply Solutions, including but not limited to significant reduction in compensation, benefits, or working conditions, the licensor reserves the right to revoke the license agreement with written notice and reasonable opportunity to remedy said breach. The language was clear. My lawyer had protected me even when I didn't realize I'd need protection. I started researching what material breach meant in employment law. Case precedents. Legal interpretations. What courts had ruled in similar situations. The more I learned, the more I understood that Gerald's systematic dismantling of our benefits and working conditions probably qualified. But using that nuclear option felt terrifying. I'd be destroying the company I'd helped build, hurting innocent people, potentially ending my own career. So I tried other approaches first. I went through official channels, filing formal complaints with HR about working conditions and benefit reductions. The HR director, a nervous man named Philip who'd survived 3 rounds of Gerald's layoffs, listened sympathetically and did absolutely nothing. He explained, apologetically, that all policy decisions came from the executive level, and his department had no authority to contradict the CEO. I reached out to board members directly, sending carefully worded emails expressing concerns about employee retention and operational sustainability. 2 never responded. One sent a brief reply thanking me for my input and assuring me the board had full confidence in Gerald's leadership. Nobody wanted to hear bad news while the stock price kept climbing. I even tried talking to other department heads, hoping to build a coalition of people willing to push back against Gerald's policies collectively. Most were too afraid of losing their own jobs. A few sympathized but felt powerless. One, the VP of Sales, actually defended Gerald, arguing that the company had been too soft under Preston's leadership and needed tough management to stay competitive. Every avenue led nowhere. Gerald had complete control, the board supported him because shareholders were happy, and nobody cared that the foundation was crumbling underneath the impressive quarterly numbers. I requested a meeting with Gerald after he announced another round of benefit reductions. His assistant made me wait 2 weeks before squeezing me into a 15-minute slot on a Thursday afternoon. I arrived at his office with documentation showing how much value my software provided, how the efficiency gains I'd generated far exceeded my compensation, how the terms of my original contract entitled me to better treatment than what I was receiving. Gerald sat behind his massive desk, not looking up from his phone as I entered. His office was decorated with awards and framed magazine covers featuring his face. I stood there for 30 seconds before he acknowledged my presence with a dismissive wave toward the chair across from him. I laid out my concerns professionally. I explained that the benefit cuts violated the spirit of my contract, that my team was understaffed and overworked, that we needed resources to maintain the systems that kept the entire company running. I reminded him that StreamSync was the backbone of all Titan's operations, that without it, the company would collapse back into the inefficient mess it had been before I arrived. Gerald finally looked up. He had the kind of face that naturally arranged itself into condescension, thin lips, cold eyes, a slight sneer that seemed permanently etched into his expression. He set his phone down and leaned back in his leather chair. "Let me explain something to you," he said. "You're just the IT guy. You keep the computers running. That's not strategy. That's not leadership. That's maintenance work. You're basically a janitor with a keyboard." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent years building something revolutionary, and this man saw me as janitorial staff. I tried to maintain my composure, started to mention my patent and the licensing agreement, but he cut me off with a laugh. "I've reviewed your contract," Gerald continued. "Yes, you own some software patent. Congratulations. But you licensed it to us, and breaking that license would be corporate suicide for you. You'd never work in this industry again. Nobody would touch you. So let's drop the veiled threats and accept reality. You're an employee. A replaceable employee. If you don't like the benefits package, there's the door." His assistant smirked from her position by the window. Gerald picked up his phone again, signaling that our meeting was over. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened, then walked out without another word. I drove home in a daze. Everything my father taught me about hard work and fairness felt like lies. I'd created something valuable, negotiated a fair contract, and still ended up being treated like I was worthless. Gerald's words echoed in my head, "You're just the IT guy, you don't matter." That evening, I pulled out my original contract and read through every clause. Then I reviewed the patent documentation. Then I examined the licensing agreement that gave Titan the right to use StreamSync. My lawyer had been thorough. The license terms were crystal clear. Any material breach of my employment contract gave me grounds to revoke Titan's access to my software. The definition of material breach included significant reductions in compensation or benefits without mutual agreement. I spent the next 2 weeks documenting everything. Every benefit cut. Every policy change that violated the spirit of our original agreement. Every email where I'd raised concerns that were ignored. I compiled financial reports showing Titan's profitability, proving they weren't making cuts due to hardship but pure greed. I recorded the company's stock price trajectory, noting how much of their success was directly attributable to StreamSync's efficiency gains. Then I called my lawyer, Trevor Blackwell. He'd handled my patent application and contract negotiations. He was expensive but brilliant, a former corporate litigator who'd gone into private practice after getting tired of defending companies that exploited their employees. I met him at his office on a Saturday morning and laid out everything. Trevor read through my documentation for an hour without speaking. Finally, he looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. "This is airtight," he said. "They've violated your contract in multiple ways. You absolutely have grounds to revoke the license. But understand what you're doing here. Titan runs entirely on your software. Without it, they can't operate. Their stock will crater. People will lose jobs. This isn't just revenge on one jerk CEO, this will have serious consequences." I thought about my father losing his job to automation, about how nobody cared about the consequences for him. I thought about Gerald's smirk, his casual cruelty, his certainty that I was powerless. I thought about every person he'd treat the same way if nobody ever pushed back. "I understand," I said. "Prepare the paperwork." Trevor drafted a formal notice of license revocation due to material contract breach. He included extensive documentation of every violation, every broken promise, every way Titan had failed to honor our agreement. The letter gave them 72 hours to remedy all breaches or face complete loss of StreamSync access. He sent it via certified mail and email to Gerald, the board of directors, and Titan's general counsel. The letter was 12 pages long, meticulously detailed, and devastating in its clarity. Trevor had organized the evidence chronologically, showing the systematic erosion of my employment terms over Gerald's tenure. He included financial analysis proving Titan's cuts weren't driven by economic necessity but by profit maximization. He quoted the specific contract language that Gerald's policies violated. The conclusion was inescapable: Titan had breached our agreement repeatedly and deliberately. Trevor sent copies to every board member individually, to the general counsel, and to Gerald himself. He also sent a copy to Titan's outside legal firm, the White Shoe corporate law practice that handled their major litigation. We wanted everyone who mattered to understand the severity of the situation before Gerald could spin his own narrative. The certified mail required signatures. Trevor tracked the delivery confirmations obsessively. The general counsel signed for his copy at 9:47 a.m. on Monday. 3 board members received theirs by noon. Gerald didn't sign for his until 3:15 p.m., probably because his assistant screened his mail and nobody wanted to be the one to hand him a legal threat. I imagine the chaos that document must have triggered. The general counsel reading through it with growing horror, realizing they had no defense. Board members making panicked phone calls to each other. Gerald's fury when he finally understood that the person he dismissed as unimportant had just threatened the company's entire operational foundation. Trevor advised me to maintain my normal routine. Go to work, do my job, act like nothing had changed. Any deviation from regular behavior could be interpreted as bad faith or strategic manipulation. So I went to the office Monday morning and sat at my desk like always, except my stomach was twisted in knots and I kept refreshing my email every few minutes. Nothing happened Monday. The silence was excruciating. I watched people go about their normal tasks, unaware that the entire company might cease functioning in less than 72 hours. My team asked if I was feeling okay. I must have looked as stressed as I felt. I told them I was dealing with some contract issues, nothing they needed to worry about. Tuesday was worse. Still no response from Titan's leadership. Trevor called twice to check in, reminding me that silence was a tactical choice on their part. They were probably consulting with lawyers, analyzing options, trying to determine if I was bluffing or serious. The uncertainty was deliberate, meant to make me anxious and potentially willing to back down. By Tuesday afternoon, I started questioning everything. Maybe I'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe there was a legal loophole I'd missed. Maybe they'd find some way to strip my patent or tie me up in litigation forever. Maybe I should call Trevor and tell him I wanted to withdraw the notice, that we could negotiate differently. But then I remembered Gerald's face during our meeting. The casual cruelty. The absolute certainty that he could treat me however he wanted because I had no recourse. That memory kept me from picking up the phone. Tuesday evening, I received an email from someone I didn't recognize, a partner at Titan's outside law firm. The message was carefully neutral, acknowledging receipt of Trevor's notice and requesting a meeting to discuss potential paths forward. They proposed Thursday morning, suggesting their offices as a neutral location. Trevor advised accepting but insisting on Titan's headquarters instead. We wanted the board members present, wanted them to see this conversation happening in their own building. I sent a brief response agreeing to Thursday at 9 a.m. in Titan's main conference room. The email felt surreal to write. I was dictating terms to a company that employed me, forcing their leadership to meet on my schedule. Part of me expected someone to burst into my apartment and tell me this whole thing was illegal, impossible, that employees don't get to make demands of their corporate employers. Wednesday was the longest day of my life. I kept checking the clock, calculating how many hours remained before the 72-hour deadline expired. 41 hours. 38 hours. 34 hours. The numbers ticked down with agonizing slowness. I couldn't focus on actual work. I spent most of the day reviewing Trevor's documentation again, reassuring myself that our legal position was solid. Around 2 p.m. Wednesday, I got a call from Philip in HR. His voice was strained, formal in a way that suggested someone was listening to the conversation. He asked if I could come to his office to discuss some administrative matters. I told him I wasn't available, that any company business would need to wait until after Thursday's meeting. There was a long pause, then he hung up without saying goodbye. That phone call confirmed what I'd suspected. Gerald was trying to find ways to undermine my position. Maybe they'd planned to fire me, claim I'd been terminated for cause and therefore had no grounds to revoke the license. Maybe they wanted to pressure me in person, use HR procedures to intimidate me into backing down. I texted Trevor immediately. He said refusing the HR meeting was the right move, that any interaction before our scheduled negotiation could be twisted against me. Wednesday evening, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. Best case, they'd agree to my demands, restore everything, and I'd continue working at Titan under better conditions. Worst case, they'd refuse, I'd revoke the license, and the company would collapse. Middle scenarios ranged from partial agreements to protracted legal battles that could consume years of my life. Around midnight, I got out of bed and opened my laptop. I pulled up StreamSync's admin panel, the master control system only I had access to. With a few keystrokes, I could disable the software completely. Every warehouse, every distribution center, every inventory system across Titan's entire operation would stop functioning instantly. The power felt intoxicating and horrifying. I didn't do it, obviously. The deadline hadn't passed. But looking at that screen, understanding how much control I actually held, made everything feel more real. This wasn't theoretical anymore. In less than 24 hours, I might actually follow through. I went to work Monday morning as usual. Nobody said anything. Tuesday passed the same way. I started wondering if they were taking it seriously or just assuming I'd never follow through. Wednesday afternoon, I got an email from Gerald's assistant scheduling an emergency meeting for Thursday morning. The conference room was packed. Gerald sat at the head of the table, flanked by Titan's general counsel and 3 board members I recognized from company newsletters. Trevor accompanied me, setting his briefcase on the table with a solid thunk that made several people flinch. Gerald's demeanor had changed completely. The arrogance was gone, replaced by barely controlled panic masquerading as anger. He started talking immediately, his voice loud and aggressive. "This is extortion," he said. "You're trying to hold this company hostage over hurt feelings. We have lawyers too. You'll spend years in court and lose everything." Trevor opened his briefcase calmly. "My client owns the patent for StreamSync. Your license to use that patent is conditional on maintaining the employment terms specified in his contract. You've breached those terms repeatedly and systematically. This isn't extortion, it's enforcement of a legally binding agreement your company signed willingly." The general counsel shifted uncomfortably. "We can negotiate. Restore his benefits, give him a raise. Surely we can reach an accommodation." I spoke for the first time. "I don't want negotiations. You had years to honor the original agreement. Instead, you brought in someone who called me a janitor with a keyboard and told me I don't matter. The 72-hour deadline expires in 6 hours. Either restore every benefit that's been cut, reinstate all the policies that existed before Mr. Vaughn arrived, and provide written guarantees that my team will receive proper staffing and resources, or I revoke the license permanently." One of the board members, an older woman named Patricia Townsend, leaned forward. "You realize this will destroy the company. Thousands of people work here. Their livelihoods depend on Titan staying operational. You'd throw them all under the bus because your feelings got hurt?" The guilt almost worked. Almost. Then I remembered Gerald's face, his absolute certainty that he could treat me however he wanted because I had no power. I remembered every other employee who'd suffered under his cost-cutting, every person who'd left because they couldn't take it anymore. "I gave 7 years to building something that made this company successful," I said. "I honored every term of my contract. You are the ones who decided to break our agreement. Those consequences are on you, not me. You have 5 hours and 47 minutes. We left. Trevor drove me back to the office, where I waited at my desk, watching the clock. My team kept working around me, unaware that their world might be about to change dramatically. I felt sick with anxiety and anticipation in equal measure. The conference room had been tense, but leaving it felt even stranger. I returned to my desk in the IT department while the executive team presumably continued their emergency discussions 3 floors above me. My coworkers noticed something was different. I'd been gone for over 2 hours, and several people had seen me arrive with a lawyer, but nobody asked questions directly. The IT culture had always been respectful of privacy, probably because we all dealt with sensitive information regularly. I tried to focus on routine tasks. There were support tickets to review, system updates to approve, normal operational responsibilities that didn't stop just because I was potentially about to blow up the company. But concentration was impossible. Every few minutes I'd check my phone, my email, waiting for some response from upstairs. Around 11 a.m., I noticed unusual activity on our network monitoring systems. Someone was accessing StreamSync's documentation files, the technical specifications I'd written explaining how the software operated. The access came from an IP address registered to Gerald's office. I watched in real time as whoever was at his computer, probably an assistant or maybe a technical consultant they'd brought in, spent 45 minutes reading through architecture diagrams and code documentation. They were looking for vulnerabilities, trying to determine if Titan could somehow continue operating without my cooperation. Could they reverse engineer the software? Hire another developer to recreate it? Find a legal argument that my patent was somehow invalid? I felt a grim satisfaction knowing they wouldn't find any easy solutions. StreamSync was complex, thoroughly documented legally, and deeply integrated into every aspect of Titan's operations. There was no quick fix. Around 1 p.m., my desk phone rang. I didn't recognize the extension. When I answered, a woman's voice I didn't recognize asked if I could come to a different conference room on the 2nd floor. Not a request for a meeting, just a location and a time. 20 minutes. I texted Trevor the details. He was at his office across town but said he could arrive in 30 minutes. I told the woman I'd be there in 45 minutes and wouldn't meet without my attorney present. She started to protest, then the line went dead. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. Same woman, different tone, more respectful, less commanding. The meeting would be in 1 hour. That was acceptable. I confirmed and hung up. Trevor arrived at the office looking grim. "They're going to try something," he said. "The separate meeting, the informal request, bringing you away from witnesses, this is a pressure tactic. Stay calm, don't agree to anything without my explicit approval, and remember that we hold all the leverage here." We walked to the 2nd floor conference room together. It was smaller than the main executive suite, windowless and slightly shabby. Two people waited inside, Patricia Townsend, the board member who'd spoken earlier, and a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Randall Chen, the partner from Titan's external law firm. No Gerald. His absence spoke volumes. Either he was too angry to negotiate rationally, or the board had already decided he was a liability. Patricia gestured to chairs across from her. Trevor and I sat. Nobody offered coffee or small talk. Randall spoke first, his tone carefully neutral. We'd like to explore a resolution that works for everyone. Your concerns are legitimate. The board recognizes that certain policy changes may have been implemented without adequate consideration of their contractual implications. May have been? Trevor's voice was sharp. The violations are documented extensively. There's no ambiguity here. Patricia held up a hand. You're right. Let's not dance around it. Gerald made decisions that violated your client's contract. The board takes responsibility for not providing adequate oversight. The question now is whether we can remedy this situation or if we're heading toward mutual destruction. I appreciated her directness. What are you proposing? She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a document outlining revised employment terms. As I read through it, Patricia explained, full restoration of all benefits to pre-Gerald levels. 40% budget increase for IT operations. You'll report directly to the board rather than through the executive chain. Your compensation will include a profit-sharing component tied directly to company performance. And Gerald will be placed on administrative leave effective immediately while the board conducts a comprehensive review of his leadership. It was more than I'd expected. Trevor leaned over to read the document, his expression carefully neutral. Administrative leave isn't termination, he said. What's to stop him from coming back in 3 months and making your client's life miserable again? Randall exchanged glances with Patricia. The board meeting is scheduled for next week, he said. Between us, the votes are already there to terminate Gerald's employment. But we need to follow proper procedures, document everything appropriately. If we fire him today without adequate process, he could sue successfully for wrongful termination. His contract has protections that require specific steps. So you're asking my client to trust that you'll follow through, Trevor said. That's not acceptable. We need guarantees. Patricia's jaw tightened. We're offering everything you demanded. Full restoration, increased budget, direct board oversight. What more do you want? I spoke before Trevor could respond. Gerald's written acknowledgement. Before I agree to anything, he personally admits that his assessment of my value was wrong. In writing, signed, on company letterhead. The room went silent. Randall looked uncomfortable. Patricia's expression was unreadable. Finally, she said, that's a big ask. Gerald's ego won't handle that easily. Neither did mine when he called me a janitor with a keyboard, I replied. But I'm not asking him to grovel. Just a simple, factual statement acknowledging that his previous characterization was inaccurate. One paragraph. If he can't do that, if his pride is more important than saving this company, then we don't have a deal. Patricia stood abruptly. I need to make some calls. Give me an hour. She and Randall left. Trevor and I sat alone in the conference room. He pulled out his laptop and started making notes. You're handling this well, he said. Better than most people in your position would. Just remember, if they agree to everything you've asked for, you'll need to actually follow through on your end. No revoking the license later if you get angry about something else. This resolves the breach completely. I understand, I said. I don't want to destroy Titan. I just want fair treatment. The hour stretched into 90 minutes. Trevor and I waited mostly in silence, occasionally discussing legal technicalities but mostly just sitting with our own thoughts. I checked my phone obsessively. The deadline was still hours away, but time felt both frozen and racing simultaneously. Finally, Patricia returned alone. She looked exhausted. Gerald has agreed. We've drafted the document. He'll sign it within the hour and you'll receive a copy immediately. In exchange, you'll agree to the revised employment terms and the license continues uninterrupted. Do we have a deal? Trevor examined the revised contract carefully, making occasional notes, asking clarifying questions about specific clauses. I watched Patricia while he worked. She seemed genuinely relieved, not like someone trying to manipulate us but like a person who'd just prevented a catastrophe and felt the weight of it. After 20 minutes of review, Trevor nodded to me. This is solid. Everything you asked for and then some. If you're comfortable proceeding, I'd recommend accepting. I looked at Patricia. What happens to the employees who've suffered under Gerald's policies? The people who left, the ones still here who've been working understaffed and underpaid? She sighed. We can't fix everything overnight. But I give you my word, the board's priority is stabilizing operations and rebuilding morale. That means bringing compensation and benefits back to competitive levels across the company, not just in your department. Gerald's approach was short-sighted. We know that now. It wasn't everything, but it was something. I extended my hand. Then we have an agreement. She shook it, her grip firm and warm. Relief flooded her features. Thank you. Genuinely. You could have burned everything down. I'm grateful you chose not to. 3 hours before the deadline, my phone rang. Patricia Townsend. She asked to meet privately, just the two of us, no lawyers. Trevor advised against it, but I agreed. We met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from Titan's headquarters. Patricia didn't waste time on pleasantries. The board is prepared to terminate Gerald effective immediately. We'll restore all benefits to previous levels, increase IT department funding by 40%, and put you on a performance-based compensation plan that ties your income directly to company profits. But we need the license to continue. We need time to stabilize operations and transition to new leadership. Will that satisfy you? I considered her offer carefully. I want everything in writing. I want board approval on the IT budget. I want protection against any retaliation. And I want Gerald to personally acknowledge, in writing, that his assessment of my value was incorrect. Patricia winced at the last demand. He'll never agree to that. Then you don't get the license. She made a phone call, spoke in hushed tones for several minutes, then hung up. He'll do it. Give us until tomorrow morning to finalize everything. I extended the deadline by 24 hours. That evening, I received a lengthy email from Titan's general counsel containing revised employment terms, budget allocations, and organizational structure changes. Attached was a separate document signed by Gerald Vaughn acknowledging that his previous assessment of my contributions had been inaccurate and unprofessional and that my work was essential to Titan's continued success and competitive advantage. The next morning, the board announced Gerald's resignation due to philosophical differences regarding company direction. An interim CEO was appointed, Patricia Townsend herself, actually. She sent a company-wide memo explaining that Titan would be refocusing on employee retention and satisfaction, treating its workforce as essential assets rather than expendable resources. My new contract included everything Patricia promised plus additional protections I hadn't even requested. Trevor reviewed everything one final time, then advised me to accept. I signed, and StreamSync remained operational without interruption. The paperwork was processed by Titan's legal department that same afternoon. Within hours, I had official confirmation of my new employment terms, the budget approvals for IT expansion, and the organizational changes that placed me under direct board oversight. Most surreal was the email from Gerald, sent from his company account but obviously drafted by lawyers, containing his acknowledgement that his previous assessment had been inaccurate and unprofessional. Reading those words on my screen felt vindicating and hollow at the same time. I'd forced a powerful man to admit he was wrong, but the victory tasted strange. This wasn't how I'd imagined my career unfolding when I first created StreamSync. I dreamed of building something valuable and being recognized for it naturally, not having to threaten nuclear options to get basic respect. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Word spread quickly through the company that something major had happened, though details remained vague. Gerald disappeared from the office, officially on administrative leave but effectively vanished from Titan's daily operations. Patricia assumed interim leadership responsibilities and immediately scheduled all-hands meetings to address employee concerns. I attended the meeting for our department along with my team. Patricia stood at the front of the room looking composed but tired. She explained that the company would be undergoing a recalibration of priorities under board direction. Compensation and benefits would be reviewed comprehensively. Staffing levels would be assessed to ensure adequate resources for operational needs. The focus would shift from short-term cost-cutting to sustainable long-term growth. She didn't mention me specifically, didn't explain what had triggered these changes. But several people glanced in my direction during her remarks. The connection wasn't hard to make. I'd disappeared for hours with a lawyer, Gerald had vanished, and suddenly the company was reversing course on all his signature policies. After the meeting, my team members gathered around my desk. Nobody asked directly what had happened, but the curiosity was obvious. I kept my explanation vague. There had been contractual issues that required resolution. Everything was settled now, we'd be getting the resources we'd been requesting. They seemed satisfied with that, or at least willing to pretend they were. The first tangible change came 3 days later when Patricia approved my request to hire 4 new IT staff members at competitive salaries. I'd submitted the request expecting weeks of bureaucratic review. Instead, I got approval within hours along with a note: get your team the help they need. No more delays. Recruiting was easier than I'd anticipated. Word had spread through tech industry circles that Titan was investing in its IT infrastructure again. Several qualified candidates reached out directly, having heard from former colleagues that the company culture was improving. Within 2 weeks, I'd hired a systems analyst, a database administrator, a security specialist, and a junior developer. All of them better qualified and more experienced than the bargain replacements I'd been forced to accept under Gerald's regime. Training the new hires was intensive but energizing. Having adequate staffing meant we could finally address the backlog of maintenance issues, implement security improvements that had been postponed, and start developing new StreamSync features I'd been planning for years. My original team members seemed reinvigorated too, no longer drowning under impossible workloads. The healthcare benefits restoration came through in the next benefits cycle. I received a detailed email from HR explaining the new coverage, substantially better than what we'd had under Gerald, actually. Lower deductibles, better prescription coverage, expanded mental health services. The email apologized for recent policy changes that did not adequately serve employee needs and emphasized Titan's commitment to comprehensive support for our workforce. I forwarded the email to my team with a brief note: better late than never. Several people responded with relief and gratitude. One team member, Jennifer, stopped by my desk that afternoon to tell me her daughter needed surgery that she'd been putting off due to cost concerns. The new insurance made it affordable. "I don't know what you did," she said, "but thank you." Those moments made the stress worthwhile. I hadn't just been fighting for myself, the changes benefited everyone who'd suffered under Gerald's policies. But I couldn't take full credit. The improvements were only possible because Patricia actually cared about following through, because the board recognized that destroying employee morale for quarterly profit gains was short-sighted. Gerald's termination became official 3 weeks after our confrontation. The board announcement was carefully worded, citing strategic differences regarding company direction and thanking him for his service. No mention of contractual violations or forced resignations. Corporate diplomacy at its finest. I wondered how much of a severance package they'd given him to leave quietly without making accusations. Patricia's appointment as permanent CEO came 2 weeks later. I wasn't surprised. She'd handled the crisis well, communicated clearly with employees and shareholders, and understood that sustainable success required more than brutal cost-cutting. The stock price dipped slightly on the announcement. Investors were nervous about policy changes that might reduce short-term profits, but Patricia's first earnings call addressed concerns directly and outlined a vision that seemed to satisfy most shareholders. My first direct meeting with Patricia as CEO was different from any conversation I'd had with Gerald. She scheduled an hour-long session in her office, not to lecture me but to ask questions. What did my team need to be most effective? What technology investments would have the biggest operational impact? Where did I see opportunities for StreamSync to evolve and improve? I came prepared with presentations and data, but she wanted conversation more than formal pitches. We talked about my vision for the software, about technological trends that could enhance or threaten Titan's competitive advantages, about how to balance innovation with stability. She actually listened, took notes, asked follow-up questions that showed she'd understood my explanations. Near the end of the meeting, she leaned back in her chair and said, "I want to apologize. The board should have been paying closer attention to what Gerald was doing. We got complacent because the numbers looked good. We failed you and a lot of other people. That won't happen again." The apology surprised me. Corporate leaders rarely admitted mistakes that directly. "I appreciate that," I said. "But apologies don't mean much without changed behavior." She smiled slightly. "Fair. Watch what we do, not what we say. If we screw up again, call us on it. You've proven you're willing to hold us accountable." That conversation established a pattern for our working relationship. Patricia checked in regularly, not micromanaging but staying informed about IT operations and challenges. When I requested equipment upgrades or additional staff, she asked reasonable questions about necessity and ROI but didn't reflexively deny requests to save money. The dynamic felt collaborative rather than adversarial. The broader cultural shift took longer but was unmistakable. Other departments started receiving similar attention, adequate staffing, restored benefits, investments in tools and training. Employee satisfaction scores, which Titan had stopped publishing during Gerald's tenure, resumed appearing in quarterly internal reports. The numbers were terrible initially but improved steadily as people realized the changes were genuine. I reconnected with Kevin, Sarah, and Marcus, my former team members who'd left during Gerald's reign. All three had found good positions elsewhere, but they expressed regret about leaving when they learned about the changes. Kevin actually asked if I had openings. I didn't at that moment, but I told him I'd keep him in mind if positions opened. The fact that people wanted to return spoke volumes about how dramatically things had shifted. The story didn't end there, though. News of Gerald's sudden departure leaked quickly, and business journalists started investigating why a CEO would be pushed out so abruptly from a company performing well financially. Someone in the legal department talked to a reporter. Within 2 weeks, several major business publications ran stories about the IT guy who held a company hostage and how one patent brought down a Fortune 500 CEO. The coverage was split. Some journalists portrayed me as a vindictive employee who'd endangered thousands of jobs over a personal grudge. Others saw it as a necessary stand against corporate exploitation, an example of workers using whatever leverage they had to demand fair treatment. I received death threats and job offers in equal measure. My LinkedIn profile exploded with connection requests from recruiters and angry messages from people calling me selfish. But the real shock came when the full story leaked. A business reporter at a major financial publication got hold of the actual timeline, not just Gerald's resignation, but the 72-hour ultimatum, the license revocation threat, and how close Titan had come to complete operational collapse. The article spelled out exactly what would have happened if I'd followed through: every warehouse shut down, every distribution center offline, every inventory system dead. The reporter interviewed supply chain experts who estimated Titan would have been unable to fulfill orders for weeks, maybe months. That article hit on a Wednesday morning. By market open, panic had set in among investors. The revelation that Titan's entire operation depended on a single employee's goodwill, that one person could shut down a multi-billion-dollar company with a few keystrokes, terrified shareholders. The fundamental vulnerability was now public knowledge. Titan's stock opened down 32%. By noon, it had fallen 47%. Trading was halted twice for volatility. By market close, the stock had dropped 81% from its previous week's high. Billions in market capitalization evaporated in a single day. My phone wouldn't stop ringing, journalists, analysts, former colleagues, people I hadn't spoken to in years. I turned it off and sat in my apartment watching the financial news coverage in stunned silence. Patricia held an emergency press conference that evening. She looked exhausted but composed, standing before a wall of cameras and microphones. She acknowledged the vulnerability, explained the steps Titan was taking to ensure operational stability, and emphasized that the company's relationship with me was now stronger than ever. She announced a new technical partnership structure that would diversify the company's software dependencies while maintaining StreamSync as the core system. The market didn't care. Investors had lost confidence. The next day, Titan's stock continued falling, dropping another 15% before finally stabilizing. Major institutional investors dumped their positions. Analysts downgraded the stock to sell. Business school professors started using Titan as a case study in operational risk management failures. I felt sick watching it unfold. Yes, I'd wanted Gerald held accountable. Yes, I'd demanded fair treatment. But I'd never intended to destroy shareholder value or cause this level of chaos. The people losing money weren't corporate executives, they were retirement funds, pension plans, regular people whose savings were invested in index funds that held Titan stock. Patricia called me directly 3 days after the crash. "I need you to do a public statement," she said. "The market needs reassurance that you're committed to Titan long term, that the license is secure, that this won't happen again. Will you do it?" Trevor advised against it. Public statements could be used against me later, could create legal exposure, could make me a target. But I agreed anyway. I owed it to the employees whose retirement accounts had been gutted, to the people who'd done nothing wrong but were suffering because of my choices. We held a joint press conference. Patricia and I stood together while I read a prepared statement explaining that my relationship with Titan was solidified by long-term agreements with protections for both parties, that StreamSync would continue operating indefinitely, that the company's operational foundation was secure. I took no questions, Trevor had been adamant about that, and walked off stage after 90 seconds. The statement helped, but recovery was slow. Over the following month, Titan's stock gradually climbed back to about 50% of its previous high. Some investors returned, convinced the worst was over. Others stayed away permanently, unwilling to invest in a company with such obvious single point of failure risks. The 80% crash became legendary in business circles, a cautionary tale about overdependence on individual employees and the dangers of mistreating essential personnel. I ignored all of it. My focus stayed on my work and my team. Patricia proved to be a completely different kind of leader than Gerald. She visited our department regularly, asked questions about what we needed, actually listened to the answers. She increased our headcount, approved equipment upgrades, and implemented policies that made it clear technical staff were valued contributors rather than background support. Employee satisfaction scores improved dramatically despite the stock crash. Client retention rates increased. 3 competitors reached out asking if I'd be willing to license StreamSync to them as well, which I declined. My loyalty was to Titan now that they'd proven willing to honor their commitments, even though that loyalty had cost shareholders dearly. Gerald landed another CEO position within a year, at a smaller company in a different industry. I heard through mutual contacts that he told people I'd gotten lucky, that he'd simply been outmaneuvered by clever legal language, that any company would have made the same decisions he did. He learned nothing. I occasionally wonder if I did the right thing. Thousands of people's jobs really were at risk during those 72 hours. If Titan's board had called my bluff, if they'd refused to negotiate, I would have followed through and revoked the license. The company would have collapsed. All those workers would have suffered because of my choice. But they would have suffered eventually anyway under Gerald's leadership. Companies that treat employees as disposable eventually fail because good people leave and mediocre replacements can't sustain the same level of innovation and excellence. I just accelerated a reckoning that was inevitable. My father calls every few weeks now. He's proud of what I did, says I stood up for myself in a way he never could. He talks about his old plant job sometimes, about how management kept cutting corners and benefits until nobody cared anymore, until quality declined and clients left and the whole operation shut down. He sees my story differently than the business journalists do, not as David versus Goliath but as someone refusing to let history repeat itself. The patent for StreamSync is worth considerably more now. Several venture capitalists have approached me about starting my own company, licensing the technology more broadly, becoming an entrepreneur instead of an employee. I've considered it. Trevor thinks I should do it, says I've proven I have the leverage to succeed independently. But I stay at Titan. Patricia keeps her promises. My team is well staffed and well compensated. We're developing new features for StreamSync that will make it even more valuable. The work feels meaningful again instead of exploitative. Maybe that's naive, maybe I'm leaving money on the table by not pursuing other opportunities, but there's something satisfying about proving that a company and its employees can have a genuinely mutual relationship if both sides honor their commitments. I still have Gerald's written acknowledgement framed in my home office. I don't look at it often, but knowing it exists provides a strange comfort. Proof that sometimes the person everyone dismisses as unimportant can force powerful people to recognize their worth. Proof that contracts matter, that leverage matters, that 7 years of work building something valuable means you don't have to accept being called a janitor with a keyboard. The software I created changed everything for Titan Supply Solutions. But standing up for myself, risking everything to demand fair treatment, changed something more important. It changed me. I'm not the same person who walked into that first meeting with Preston Hayes, hoping someone would just give me a chance. I know what I'm worth now. Nobody will ever make me forget that again. And if they try, I still own the patent.